the factors that you have to deal with at the beach, and actually what's increasingly becoming one of the most dangerous weather phenomena, is something called rip currents. You may have heard of this or even seen flags at the beach, but that's today's topic. And meteorologist Iisha Scott's going to talk about rip currents. They are very, very dangerous. We see numerous people caught in them every single year, especially on the North and South Carolina coast. Here's a couple things to keep in mind. Iisha's going to talk about ways to spot them, what to do, and more importantly, pay attention to the lifeguards. They will put flags up that will tell you about that risk out there. There's a lot of information leading up to this weather-wise that will tell us why there is a risk for rip currents on a certain day. So today's topic, rip currents with meteorologist Iisha Scott. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm meteorologist Iisha Scott, and we are going to talk about rip currents today because we're getting closer and closer to the start of the summer season. It's getting warmer outside, and I know many of you will be heading back to the beaches. So I want to make sure that you are well aware of what a rip current is and also how to spot one. All right, so let's go to the definition. A rip current is a strong, narrow current of water flowing away from the shore. Okay, so a rip current, they're actually driven by breaking waves. They tend to form in areas where there is less wave breaking action in between areas of greater wave breaking action. So I know that's a sort of a mouthful here, but I want to use a photo to demonstrate exactly what this means. And I really like this picture. So I got this off of weather.gov. They have a ton of photos on rip currents and how to identify rip currents. So here's just one experiment that they use, this green dye actually showing the rip current going back out to sea. So when we mentioned the breaking waves, we have water that flows towards the coast, right? Towards the shore. So those waves actually break at the shore. But in between those waves breaking, we have a gap here. You can see that in this photo. That's where you see a lot of that green concentrated at the shoreline. In between those breaking waves, we have a gap. So what happens is that water begins to flow back out to sea, and it does so as a narrow current of water. Okay, so you can see that here in that photo. Now, this is an overhead shot. Rip currents are usually easier to spot overhead than at the surface, but I'll show you a picture if you're on the ground of what it may look like. Here's another photo. This is also from weather.gov, just showing a rip current here. You can see the water flowing back out to sea. You can even see a little bit of a spin kind of towards the bottom of that page there as the water flows back out. And also the third photo, this is at the surface. So you can see the waves starting to break on the left-hand side of your screen. And then you can see that gap there where the red arrows are pointing. So whenever you see something that looks like that, that's potentially a rip current. When you see that break in the waves, remember we mentioned the break in the waves there. Now off to the right, we've got a structure. Okay, so we're going to talk more about piers, jetties, structures like that are in the water and why you don't want to swim near them. So we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. All right, so I've worked a good chunk of my career in beach towns, forecasting for beach communities. And one thing that we always mentioned, I always forecast for, was rip currents. Okay, so rip currents are forecast in 3 different categories: low risk, moderate risk, high risk. So when there is a low risk for rip currents, that means the wind and or wave conditions are not expected to support the development of rip currents. But I mentioned the jetties and piers. Rip currents can sometimes occur, especially along or near jetties and piers. So that's why I said you don't want to really get too close to those jetties and piers, especially if you're just trying to swim. A moderate risk for rip currents means the wind and or wave action supports, or conditions, I should say, support strong or more frequent rip currents. When there's a moderate risk for rip currents, only experienced swimmers should enter the water. All right. And then for the high risk, that means wind and or wave conditions support dangerous rip currents. Rip currents are at that point life-threatening, and no one, absolutely no one, should be entering the water. So let's talk about what you should do to get out of a rip current. So the rip current, again, is that narrow current of water flowing away from the shore. And you can see that here in this graphic. What you do not want to do is fight that current. Most people drown because they try to fight the current. They tire themselves out and they basically give up because they can no longer fight that current. So what you want to do is swim to the side of the current. You want to let it take you out, but you want to swim to the side of the current and then swim back in. Okay, if you absolutely cannot escape the current, then you want to float or tread water. Let it take you out, but make sure that you're floating. Whatever you do, do not try to fight that current. Okay. So let's talk about here just some do's and don'ts when it comes to rip currents. Never swim alone. Always swim with a lifeguard present. Okay. You want to stay at least 100 feet away from piers and jetties. At least. Again, because we mentioned rip currents almost always occur along those piers and jetties. You want to throw a rip current victim something that floats. So if you see someone who is caught in a rip current, you do not want to go out there and help them yourself. Okay, you want to throw them a life jacket, a cooler, something that floats so that they can grab onto. You want to yell instructions on how to escape that current. You don't want to go out there and put your life at risk to save someone else's life. Okay. Because again, if you go out there trying to save someone else's life, then there's a potential that you could also lose your own life as well. Okay, so hopefully you learned a little bit about rip currents. We'll get more into rip currents as we go into the summer season, but hopefully this was helpful. And the next time that you do go to the beaches, you know exactly what to look for and what to do if caught in a rip current.
All right. Thank you, Iisha. I mean, really is an important tool. Sometimes I'm amazed when I see the stats of people that are injured or killed by weather over the last 10 years. Rip currents have steadily risen to the top of that list. Flooding is also one of those. So we don't often think about rip currents as being very dangerous, but they are one of the most dangerous weather phenomena that we deal with. So today's weather topic was rip currents. Tomorrow we'll be back at 1 o'clock again. Remember, if you miss any of our weather schools, you can go to WCNC.com, scroll down the page. You're going to see a little icon that says Weather School. Looks like that right over my shoulder. It's actually got some gold on it. You can click on there and it takes us to our YouTube channel where every single episode, going all the way back to the beginning of March when I did the first one, is all there. So you can go back and rewatch them or share them or use them again next year during the school year. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock and every day, Monday through Friday, through the rest of the school year. Have a great, great Wednesday. Stay weather aware. Keep an eye on some strong storms coming through tonight. I'll be talking about that on WCNC Charlotte.